The two.
What's the difference between a porter and stout?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're both dark, kind of have that coffee aroma to it.
Yeah, one way to illustrate that just sort of visually and through memory would be able to think about a brown ale. Okay?
Okay.
So between a brown ale and a stout, you kind of have a porter, right?
Yeah, okay.
It's kind of in the middle there. So porters, brown ales, stouts, IPAs, Hefeweizens, those are all styles. They're beer styles.
Right.
In the case of a stout and a porter, we're talking about ales. All right. It comes down to ingredients. So like before we were talking about ales and lagers, came down mostly to fermentation temperatures, the type of yeast we were using, and the conditioning time, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, those are both ales, so that's not it. They may or may not use different yeasts. It doesn't really matter. A lot of breweries just use the same ale yeast for a lot of their beers. Mm. But what it comes down to more specifically now when you're getting into styles, because porter is a style and stout is a style, is the ingredients actually used. So the grains, the hops that you're using for it. So stouts have much more of everything than a porter does. More grain, more hops. You're going to have more hops in there to balance out the maltiness of the grain. Yeah. It's not going to necessarily make it more perceptibly bitter, but you need that in there so you don't have a sweet beer. Basically, it just tastes like sweet malt all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's a lot of different ingredients that might go into any sort of ale or, porter or stout, including heavier caramel malts, caramel 60s, caramel 80s, caramel 120s. Pale malt, of course, is the body of it, but you've got brown malts, you've got chocolate malt, you have black patent malt, you have roasted barley. Black patent and roasted, you might see those in smaller proportions in porters because those sort of kind of real toasted burnt characteristics are not necessarily inherent to many porters, but they're definitely in stouts, especially Irish stouts. So they'll have a lot of the very roasted grains, where porters will have small amounts of those for some color, and then have a lot more caramel and kind of brown malt in it than maybe a stout would. Kind of depending again, but the stout has more of everything in the grain bill than the porter does. Either one of them can be the same or more in alcohol content, doesn't matter.
Right.
You will probably have a higher IBU in a stout overall, or at least more hops in a stout. Without adding bitterness, because you have to because you have to balance it against that maltiness. Whereas a porter, you're not putting quite as much into the grain bill. Okay. So many stouts will start out with a little higher grain bill, a little higher original gravity, maybe even end a little bit higher than a porter would, depending on the style.
Yeah.
Irish stouts, being their own style of stout or category of stout, are much drier and a little more bitter. Whereas like an imperial stout, like an Old Rasputin or something, is super huge just all the way around.
Oh yeah,
or a Shakespeare stout,
just like the fucking
like
Kavatica too from Fort George. Like, and I've noticed with both of them, they range in the alcohol volume too. So
absolutely. So it just depends on what you're putting in and what category you're making in the stout. So stout is a style, and then you have different categories: foreign export, Irish, oatmeal, right? Like all these, imperial. You have all these different types of stout within that category. Right. Within that style, you have all these categories. Same thing with a porter. Porter is pretty much porter, but, you might have a Black Butte porter, which is on the middle heavy side, whereas an Anchor porter from Anchor Steam or Anchor Brewery is quite a heavy porter. And I've also had other porters that were quite light, really, almost brown ale, maybe just a little darker color than a brown ale, but just sort of caramely and light tasting. Yeah. Widmer, for example, their porter is probably right in the middle,
Like I said, there's a lot of similarities.
Yep, that's like the difference between, a pale ale and I don't know, a Kolsch or something, right? Right. You're talking about both of them could potentially be ales, but it's about the ingredients that go into them. Yeah. Or between a pale ale and an IPA. It's about the ingredients that go into them. Yeah. Get it?
Okay. Well, that makes sense.